The message came like a whisper across the stars. It was not a clear voice, not a proud call, but a broken cry. It repeated again and again, a signal wrapped in fear. Help us. Please help. They are coming. At first, the signal was ignored. The great empires of the galaxy heard it. But they turned away. For them, such cries were common. Every year, some colonies screamed for rescue. And every year, most were lost. To answer meant to risk their fleets, their soldiers, their fragile peace, and so they stayed silent. The cry of the unknown world faded in the background of the stars, until it reached human ears. Humans were not the strongest race, not the oldest, not the most advanced, but to the galaxy, they were something else. They were called Deathworlders, born from a harsh and dangerous planet, raised by storms, predators, and endless struggle. Other races could not understand how such fragile creatures survived on a world so violent, but they did more than survive. They thrived, and so, when humans heard the call, they did not look away. The crew of the Terran ship Resolute listened to the recording. Captain Hayes sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the static-filled screen. The voice was alien, shaking, full of hopeless terror. "We do not know how long we can last," the voice whispered. "They come at night. They hunt us. Please, anyone." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard many distress calls before, but this one felt different. There was no demand for supplies, no request for trade, only raw fear. Fear that reached across light years and touched the human heart. Lieutenant Mora spoke first. "Captain, coordinates are attached to the signal," she said. "It's far beyond patrol routes, deep in neutral space. No allied support, too far for anyone else to bother," someone muttered. "Too dangerous," another added. But the captain only leaned forward, his voice steady, his eyes hard. "We are Deathworlders," he said. "If they are crying for help, we answer." The ship changed course. Engines burned bright, cutting across the void. Days turned into weeks as they traveled deeper, far from safe lanes. And as they drew closer, the signal grew weaker, sometimes only static. Sometimes a half-broken word, always the same tone of fear. In the halls of the ship, the crew whispered. What enemy could cause such terror? What nightmare made an entire colony beg like children? Even seasoned soldiers felt the cold weight of the unknown, but none turned back, at last. The Resolute emerged from jump space. The colony world hung below, a scarred sphere of rock and gray sky from orbit. They saw ruins, buildings torn apart, smoke rising in thin lines. The planet looked wounded, bleeding silently into the void. And then they saw movement. Small signals flickered on their scanner survivors, hiding in the ruins, barely alive. Waiting for rescue, the crew held their breath. For if there were survivors, then there were also hunters. Predators strong enough to tear down an entire colony. Predators bold enough to keep hunting even after the distress call was sent. "Prepare the landing teams," Captain Hayes ordered. "We go down." The crew felt the gravity of his words. Every alien empire in the galaxy had heard the cry, but only humans had come. The others feared what was waiting. But Deathworlders moved toward it for them. Danger was not a reason to hide, was a reason to fight. The dropship rattled as it pierced the cloud cover. Below, the colony was nothing but shadows and ruins. Broken towers, shattered roads, and silent streets. The survivors would be down there, somewhere in the dark. But so would the thing that hunted them as the ship descended. The signal repeated one last time, the voice cracked, almost fading into static. "Help us. Please, before they find us again." The crew listened in silence, and in that moment, fear turned into something else. It turned into resolve. For humans were children of a death world. And when others cried out in fear, it was they who answered. Asterisk, the dropship landed with a heavy thud, dust rising in thick clouds. The ruins stretched around them like broken bones of a dead giant. Tall buildings leaned half-collapsed, their windows shattered, their walls marked by deep claw scars. The streets were empty, silent, too silent. Not even the wind dared to move here. The human soldiers stepped out, armored suits glowing faintly in the dim light. They carried rifles close to their chests, eyes scanning every shadow. Each footstep echoed loud in the dead colony, the silence pressed against their ears. Heavier than gravity, where are they? Whispered Lieutenant Mora, her voice low. The scanner showed life signs, but faint, scattered, weak. The survivors were hiding, buried in the ruins. But they were not coming out, not yet. Captain Hayes raised his hand, signaling the team to spread. Eyes open, he said, his voice calm but sharp. They are afraid of something. And if they are afraid, so should we. The soldiers moved carefully. Every sense stretched thin. The ruins smelled of smoke and ash, of burned metal and blood, here and there. Small signs of battle remained, shattered weapons, black stains on walls, broken machines still sparking weakly. The colony had not fallen quietly, it had fought. But something stronger had crushed it. Suddenly movement. A shadow slipped across the ruins, quick, silent. The humans froze, weapons raised. But the shadow vanished, only silence returned. Heavier than before, then, from behind a broken wall, a small figure appeared. An alien child, thin, trembling, eyes wide with terror, it stared at the humans. Then darted back into the ruins. The humans followed carefully. Not too close, not too fast, and they found them. A group of survivors huddled inside what was once a shelter. Their eyes hollow, their bodies weak, when they saw the humans. They shrank back, not from hate, not from mistrust, but from fear too great to measure. One of the aliens, older, his skin marked with burns, stepped forward. His voice was broken, barely more than a whisper. "You should not have come," he said. "They will find you too." The hunters? The word hung in the air like poison. The humans exchanged glances. The name alone sent a chill through their spines. "What are the hunters?" Captain Hayes asked. The alien shook his head. Eyes wide, they come at night. They move like shadows. They take us, tear us apart. We cannot fight them. We cannot run from them. The survivors began to weep quietly, their bodies shaking. The humans felt the weight of their fear, raw and unbroken. These were not warriors, not soldiers. These were families, workers, ordinary beings who had seen something no one should see. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the ruins outside. Sharp and short, the survivors froze, terror flashing across their faces. Too late, the old alien whispered, "They are here." The humans rushed to the broken doorway. Weapons ready, in the distance, movement again, but not like before. This time, it was clear, deliberate figures crawling through the shadows. Tall, thin, their bodies twisted, their eyes glowing faintly. Their claws scraped against the walls as they moved, and their growls rumbled low, like hunger-given voice. The hunters. The humans felt their blood run cold. The creatures did not move like beasts. They moved with patience, with purpose. With intelligence, one paused, its head turning slowly, eyes locking on the human's position. Then it let out a sound, a shrill, broken cry that echoed across the ruins. A signal, a call, and more shadows stirred. "They hunt in packs," Mora whispered, her finger tight on the trigger. The old alien pulled back, shaking his head. "You cannot fight them." No one can fight them, but Captain Hayes stood tall. His voice carried steady and firm, cutting through the rising fear. "Then it is time someone tried." The soldiers took positions, rifles aimed, traps armed. The ruins were no longer silent. Growls echoed closer, claws scratching against stone. The hunters were coming, and the air itself seemed to shiver under their approach. Inside the shelter, the survivors clung to each other, eyes wide with terror. But as they looked out at the humans standing ready, something stirred inside them. Not hope yet, not belief, but something close. For the first time since the hunters came, someone was not running, someone was not hiding. Someone was standing against the dark. The hunters moved closer, their shadows crawling like a tide. The humans raised their weapons, hearts steady, breaths slow, every muscle tense, every nerve ready, and in that moment, the ruins of the colony were no longer just a graveyard. They had become a battlefield. The cry for help had been answered, and the Deathworlders had arrived. The ruins held their breath. The shadows moved like liquid, flowing across broken walls and shattered streets. The hunters were no longer whispers or half-glimpsed shapes. Now they were here, stepping into view. The first hunter crawled out from the dark of a ruined tower. Its body was long, muscles sharp under pale skin. Its arms ended in claws that gleamed like metal blades, but it was the eyes that froze the humans. Two pits of faint red light glowing with hunger and thought. It did not charge. It watched, head tilting slowly. Like a predator measuring prey, the humans kept their rifles raised, fingers tight on the triggers, but the creature did not move. Not yet. Then another appeared. And another, from cracks, from holes, from ceilings above. The hunters gathered in silence, dozens of them. Their bodies moved with a strange rhythm. Never rushing, never stumbling. It was not chaos, it was hunting. Inside the shelter, the alien survivors wept softly. One of them whispered, "We told you. We told you they cannot be stopped," but the humans did not back away. They spread out, forming a line in the ruins. Their armor catching faint light, Captain Hayes stood at the center. His voice low but steady. "They are testing us." Waiting to see if we break, he looked at his soldiers, their faces grim and focused. "Show them what Deathworlders do." The silence broke. One hunter leaped forward. A blur of claws and teeth, gunfire erupted. Bright flashes cutting through the shadows. The creature screeched as rounds tore into its chest, slamming it back against the wall. But it did not fall. It twisted, its body bending unnaturally, and lunged again. 3 rifles turned as one. The beast was ripped apart mid-air, pieces scattering across the ground. The air filled with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. The hunters shrieked as one, the sound sharp enough to pierce the ears. And then the swarm came. They rushed from all sides, walls cracking under their weight, the ground shaking as they poured in, claws scraped against armor. Fangs snapped inches from throats. The humans fired without fear. Every shot precise, every move coordinated. They were children of a death world, trained by a lifetime of struggle. To them, this was not fear. This was survival. Lieutenant Mora kicked a hunter aside, firing point-blank into its skull. Another soldier planted charges on a wall, triggering a blast that crushed to more under rubble. The ruins lit up with fire and sound, but the hunters did not retreat. They moved faster, circling, probing. It was clear these were not beasts, they were hunters with strategy. One leaped onto a rooftop, shrieking. Drawing the human's eyes upward, another swept in low, almost unseen, claws reaching for a soldier's back. But Captain Hayes turned just in time, his blade flashing, cutting deep into the creature's throat. It thrashed and fell, blood steaming on the cold ground. The survivors watched from the shelter, their fear mixing with shock. No one had ever stood against the hunters this way. The galaxy had always whispered that humans were reckless, unstable, dangerous, But now they saw something else. They saw why the galaxy called them Deathworlders. The hunters pressed harder, their shrieks shaking the air, but each time one lunged, a human met it head-on, each time claws struck. Armor and grit stood firm. And slowly, very slowly, the swarm hesitated. For the first time, the hunters paused. Their red eyes flickered, their bodies shifting uneasily. They were not used to prey that fought back, not used to prey that killed them. Captain Hayes lifted his rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. He shouted across the ruins, his voice raw and unbroken. "You've hunted long enough," he said. "Now it's our turn." The soldiers roared as one. Their fire renewed, grenades thundered. Flames spread through the ruins, the hunters screamed in rage. The sound like breaking glass and metal grinding. The ground shook as they retreated into the shadows. Dragging their wounded, the swarm melted back into the ruins. Not defeated, but delayed, the silence returned, thick and heavy. Only the smell of smoke and the echoes of battle remained. The humans stood among the broken bodies of the hunters, breathing hard. Blood spattered across their armor, but alive. The survivors stepped out of the shelter, their eyes wide. They looked at the humans with awe and disbelief. One whispered, "You fought them. You made them run." Another trembled. "No one has ever made them run," but Captain Hayes only shook his head. "They will be back," he said, his voice cold and certain. "They are studying us, waiting, learning." This was not the end, only the beginning. The survivors fell silent. Hope and fear twisting together inside them. For the first time, they believed the hunters could bleed. But they also knew the swarm was not finished. The night was not over. And the humans had only begun to show what it meant to be Deathworlders. The ruins did not stay silent for long. The hunters were gone. But their absence felt heavy. It was not victory. Only a pause. The humans knew it. The survivors felt it too. The enemy was watching, circling, waiting for the next strike. Captain Hayes ordered the team to regroup. Weapons reloaded, armor checked, traps prepared. The survivors were gathered in the center of the ruins. Too weak to move far if the humans wanted to save them. They would need to hold this ground, no retreat, no escape, only survival. "Night is coming," whispered the old alien, his voice shaking. "They are strongest in the dark." The humans exchanged grim looks. Darkness was not their enemy. They were children of storms, of caves, of jungles filled with predators. They knew how to fight when the light was gone. Lieutenant Mora led a squad to plant charges along the broken streets. Explosives hidden under rubble, motion sensors linked to rifles. Others set up barricades from shattered metal and fallen stone. The ruins became a fortress. Sharp and ugly. Not perfect, but deadly enough. The survivors watched in silence, confused. No one had ever stood and prepared for the hunters. Colonies usually fled, scattered, begged for rescue that never came. But here, the Deathworlders dug in, not to run, but to fight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ruins grew darker. Shadows stretched, air turned colder. The survivors began to tremble, clutching each other. For them, night always meant death, but the humans stood tall. Rifles ready, eyes sharp. For them, night meant the hunt was fair. The first sound came like a whisper. A scrape of claws against stone, then another, closer. The ruins filled with the sound of movement. Hundreds of feet crawling through the dark. The hunters were coming. Red eyes lit the shadows, dozens, then hundreds. They moved like water, silent and endless. The swarm poured into the streets, walls, and rooftops. Surrounding the ruins, the survivors gasped. Their fear thick enough to choke the air. But the humans did not shake. They raised their weapons as one. "Hold the line," Captain Hayes said. And the battle began. The hunters rushed forward. A tide of claws and teeth, the first wave triggered the explosives. The ground erupted in fire, bodies thrown into the air, screams piercing the night. The ruins shook with the blast, but more came, always more. The humans fired, rifles spitting flame, every shot precise, every target chosen. Hunters fell, limbs torn, heads shattered. But the swarm did not slow. They climbed over their dead, slipping through smoke and rubble. They struck from above, from the sides, from the ground beneath. Mora shouted orders. Grenades lit the sky. Walls crumbled, traps snapped, claws tore at armor. One soldier fell under the weight of 2 hunters. His scream cut short, but Hayes charged forward. Blade flashing, cutting the beasts apart. He dragged the soldier back, blood staining the ground. "No one dies alone," Hayes growled. The survivors hid behind barricades, eyes wide. They had never seen anything like this. Humans fighting like fire itself, refusing to bend, refusing to break. Each soldier fought as if the whole galaxy depended on it. And maybe it did. The hunters grew desperate. Their shrieks louder, they began to swarm together. Moving in tight packs, they leaped in coordination, striking from multiple angles at once. One crashed through the barricade, claws reaching for the survivors. But a human stepped in its path, taking the strike on his armor. He fired his last rounds into its mouth. And the beast fell in pieces. Still, the tide did not end. The ruins burned. The night shook with battle. Every second felt like an hour, every minute an eternity. But the humans did not fall back. They fought with teeth clenched and hearts steady. For they knew what the survivors did not. Deathworlders did not surrender. At last, the swarm slowed. The hunters pulled back. Their red eyes retreating into the shadows. Their shrieks echoed in frustration. But they did not press forward. Not this time. The ruins were a graveyard of broken bodies. Hunter corpses lay scattered across the streets. Blood steamed in the cold night air. The survivors looked around in stunned silence. They had lived through the night. For the first time, they had survived. But the humans were not celebrating. Captain Hayes wiped blood from his visor. His face hard. "They will come again," he said. Stronger, smarter, and angrier. The soldiers nodded. Tired but unbroken, they knew this was not over. The hunters had been wounded, humiliated. And predators always returned to finish the hunt. The survivors looked at the humans with awe. They whispered among themselves, voices trembling, "Deathworlders. They fight the darkness itself. They are monsters." Another said softly. Then his voice changed, almost reverent. "But they are monsters on our side." Above them, the night sky burned with faint stars. The ruins lay in silence again, broken and scarred. But deep within the shadows, glowing red eyes still watched. The hunters were waiting. And the final battle was yet to come. The ruins lay in silence after the battle. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of waiting. The survivors sat close together. Eyes wide, unable to sleep, the humans worked quietly. Reloading rifles, repairing armor. Checking wounded, they all knew the truth. The hunters were not gone, they were gathering. Captain Hayes stood on the broken wall of the colony square. He looked out into the shadows, his jaw tight. "They will come again," he said. His voice calm, not in small packs, not in testing waves. But all of them, one last time. The survivors trembled at his words. One asked in a broken whisper, "Can you really stop them?" Hayes turned, his eyes sharp. "No," he said. "We can't stop them." Then his voice hardened. "But we can hold them long enough to get you out." Hope flickered in the survivors' eyes. Weak but real, no one had ever promised them escape before. Every night had been only fear, every day only waiting for death. But these humans, these Deathworlders, spoke of fighting to the end. And somehow, they believed them. Preparations began. The humans set charges along the outer streets, mines in the alleys, traps in the ruins. The survivors were moved into the center of the square, where evacuation would be fastest, above. The Resolute prepared its shuttles, ready to descend at the signal. Night fell again, and with it came the sound. Claws scratching, walls cracking. Shrieks rising like a storm. The hunters had come. Not dozens this time, but hundreds. The ground shook under their weight, their red eyes filling the darkness like stars of blood. The survivors began to sob, but the humans did not break. They stood in the ruins with rifles raised, blades ready. Every soldier knew this was the final stand, and none stepped back. The swarm came like a wave of teeth and claws. Explosions lit the streets. Fire rolled across the ruins. Hunters were thrown into the air, torn apart by traps, but more replaced them. Endless, furious, unstoppable, the humans fired until barrels smoked. They fought hand to hand when the beasts closed in. Armor cracked, blood spilled, but no one ran. They held the line with grit, with fury, with the strength of Deathworlders. Lieutenant Mora shouted over the roar, "Signal the ship." Now? A flare shot into the night sky, bright as a second sun. Moments later, the Resolute's shuttles roared through the clouds. Engines blazing, they descended fast, guns firing, cutting paths through the swarm. The survivors cried out, a sound of shock and hope. For the first time in endless nights, salvation was real. Humans covered their retreat, dragging the aliens to the shuttles. One group at a time, the hunters struck harder, furious at losing their prey. But each time they lunged. A human stood in their way. A hunter leaped at a shuttle ramp, claws reaching for screaming survivors. A soldier tackled it, locking it in a deadly grip. Both tumbled into the flames below. The survivors were safe, but the soldier was gone. Another hunter broke through the barricade. Towering over the aliens, Captain Hayes met it head-on, his blade tearing into its chest. It fell in pieces, black blood steaming around him one by one. The survivors were loaded onto the shuttles. The humans fought in a shrinking circle, every step back buying precious seconds. Their armor was dented, their rifles nearly empty. Still, they fought. At last, the last survivor was aboard. The shuttle doors closed with a heavy thud. But the hunters were still coming, faster, louder, endless. Captain Hayes looked at his soldiers, his face calm in the firelight. "You know what to do," he said. They nodded, no hesitation, no fear. They were Deathworlders. The final charges were armed, the last traps set. As the shuttles lifted into the sky, the hunters swarmed the square. The humans stood tall in the ruins, battered but unbroken. Their final stand lit the night with fire. Explosions ripped through the colony. Towers falling, flames consuming, the swarm screamed in rage. Swallowed by the inferno, from above, the survivors watched in silence. Their world burning, their hunters dying, and the humans below, holding the line to the very end. When the Resolute jumped back into safe space, the survivors gathered in the main hall. They wept, but not only in grief. They whispered to each other words that carried like prayer. The Deathworlders came. They fought for us when no one else would. They are monsters. But they are our monsters, and across the galaxy, rumors spread, whispers turned to stories. Stories turned to legend that when the weak cried for help, it was not the great empires who answered. It was the Deathworlders, the humans, and wherever they stood, even the darkest hunters could bleed. The Resolute drifted through deep space. Its engines burned steady. carrying the rescued survivors far from the ruined colony. Inside the ship, the aliens sat in silence, still shaken, still haunted. They had lived, but their world was gone. And behind their eyes, the memory of red glowing hunters still burned. The human crew moved among them, offering food, water, and medical care. But the survivors barely spoke, their voices broken. They whispered only one word again and again: hunters. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, staring at the star map. His crew was battered, their armor scarred. Their numbers reduced, yet his eyes carried no defeat. They had done what no one else dared. They had faced the hunters and lived, but something still gnawed at him. He had seen the way the hunters fought. Not like beasts, but like soldiers, coordinated, intelligent, relentless. And he knew the truth. This was not the end. Lieutenant Mora stepped forward, voice low. "Sir, the survivors say the hunters. They did not come from that colony." Hayes turned slowly, his jaw tight. "Then where?" Mora's eyes were dark. "They say the hunters came from the sky, from somewhere else. And they will follow." The words sank like stone in the bridge. The crew glanced at each other, uneasy. If the hunters could move between stars, then the colony was not their only prey. The hunters were not bound to one world. They were spreading. Suddenly, alarms flared. The ship's sensors screamed, unidentified signals closing in. Fast red blips filled the screen, surrounding them from every side. The crew froze, hearts racing. The hunters had followed. Through the vast dark shapes emerged. Not living beasts this time, but ships, twisted and jagged, moving like predators in water. Their hulls gleamed black, lined with claws of steel. Each one pulsed with faint red light. Hunter ships, the survivors wailed in terror, clutching each other. "No, no. They cannot leave the planet," one sobbed. But the truth was clear. The hunters were more than creatures. They were a force, a species, an empire of predators. And they had marked the humans now. Captain Hayes gripped the rail. "Battle stations," he ordered. Voice steady, the crew rushed into action, shields rising, weapons powering. But the Resolute was a single ship, scarred from battle. Low on supplies, against a fleet, its chances were slim. The hunter ships circled, slow and deliberate. They did not rush the kill. They waited. Like wolves surrounding wounded prey. On the bridge, the lights flickered. The ship groaned, the silence pressed in heavy, broken only by the steady beeping of enemy signals drawing closer. Lieutenant Moray's hands trembled on the console. "Sir, we cannot fight them all," she whispered. Hayes' eyes stayed hard. "No," he said. "But we can make them bleed." The crew exchanged glances, their faces pale but firm. They were Deathworlders. They did not surrender. Even in the jaws of the swarm, they would strike. The Resolute's guns roared. Blue fire lit the void. Tearing into the nearest hunter ship, metal and flame exploded outward. The beast-like vessel screaming as it broke apart. The other hunter ships shrieked in return, their weapons igniting. Beams of red light slashed across the void. Hammering against the human shields, the ship shook, walls groaning. Sparks raining from consoles. Still, the humans fired. The survivors huddled in the lower decks. Listening to the storm outside, every blast echoed like thunder. Every strike shook their bones. They had thought the humans were reckless, maybe even suicidal, but now they saw something else. They saw a species that would rather die fighting than ever bow to fear. The hunters closed in tighter, their claws of steel piercing through shields. The Resolutes screamed under the impact, metal tearing, lights flickering. On the bridge, alarms blared, hull breaches, fires spreading. Oxygen leaking, but Hayes did not flinch. "Keep firing," he ordered. "Make them know Deathworlders bite back one by one." The human guns burned out. One by one, their systems failed. Yet for every hunter ship that struck them, the Resolute struck back. Another enemy vessel exploded in flame. Another fled smoking into the dark. The swarm had expected prey. Instead, they had found predators, but the truth could not be ignored. The ship was dying. The hunters were endless. And somewhere deep inside, even Hayes knew, this fight would not end here. It was only the beginning. The bridge filled with smoke. Red warning lights flashing across every screen. Lieutenant Mora turned, her voice a whisper. "Captain? What now?" Hayes stared into the void at the endless swarm of red glowing ships. His voice was calm, steady, unbroken. "Now," he said, "we show the galaxy why they call us Deathworlders." And with that, the Resolute turned toward the heart of the swarm. Engines burning bright. A single ship against an ocean of predators. But a single ship filled with humans, and humans never went quietly. The Resolute burned through the swarm. Its engines roared bright against the black of space. Hunter ships closed in from every side. Claws of steel tearing at its shields, red beams lashing across its hull. The human vessels shook, groaned, but did not stop inside. The crew fought not only for survival, but for something greater. They fought to send a message. Captain Hayes gripped the console, sparks raining down around him. "Target the largest one," he ordered. His voice calm despite the chaos. If they were going to fall, they would fall striking the heart. The forward cannons lit. A burning spear of blue tearing through the dark. The beam ripped across the Hunter flagship, splitting its jagged hull. The creature ship shrieked as fire consumed it. Even as the Resolute bled, it had wounded the Predator. The swarm howled in rage, their red eyes blazing brighter. They surged closer, weapons striking harder. The humans braced for impact, every screen flashing warnings, every alarm screaming. But then something unexpected. From the dark of the stars, more signals appeared. Not hunters, not predators, but ships of another kind, smaller, weaker, patched together with desperate repairs. The survivors' allies, old friends and neighbors. They had followed the Resolute's trail. They had come to see what had answered their cry. The ragged fleet opened fire. Their weapons weak, but determined, together with the humans. They struck the swarm from two sides. The hunters twisted, momentarily shaken, and in that moment, the Resolute turned and broke free. Engines screaming, it ripped out of the swarm, carrying its survivors into the void. When silence returned, the ship was scarred. Hull torn, decks burning, lives lost, but the crew still stood. They had not only survived, they had defied. And the hunters had learned a bitter truth. Prey could fight back in the medical bay. The survivors whispered as humans patched their wounds. They faced the swarm, one muttered awe in his voice. They did not run, another said softly, they bled. But they stood. The galaxy had always feared Deathworlders. But now it began to understand them on the bridge. Captain Hayes met with his officers. Their faces tired, but their eyes still sharp. "We cannot fight them alone," Mora said. Voice heavy, "They are too many to spread." Too strong. Hayes nodded. "But we can do something no one else will," he said. "We can unite the ones they hunt." The words hung in the air. No empire had ever united against the hunters. Fear kept them apart. Silence kept them weak. But humanity was different. Humanity was born in danger. Raised by struggle, driven by defiance. If anyone could rally the galaxy, it was the Deathworlders. Hayes sent the order. Signals were transmitted across neutral space. 2 colonies, 2 outposts, 2 wandering fleets. A message carried by human grit. The hunters are not gods. They bleed, they can be fought, stand with us, at first. The replies came in whispers, a few voices. Cautious, uncertain, then more. Alien captains sending their oaths. Colonies sending what forces they could. Not armies, not fleets, but sparks, and sparks could become fire. The crew of the Resolute watched the transmissions flood in. For the first time since the hunters appeared, the galaxy was not silent. For the first time, the weak were not hiding. They were answering. Hayes stood tall. His voice carrying across the bridge. "We are Deathworlders," he said. "Our world taught us to fight storms, beasts, and fire. Now we will teach the hunters the same lesson. We do not kneel, we do not break. And we do not fight alone anymore." The crew raised their fists. Their voices roaring, the vow spread beyond the ship. Carried across comes to every ally who listened. It was no longer just survival. It was war, but deep in the dark. The hunters stirred in their shadowed worlds. Their red eyes glowed brighter. The swarm had been challenged, and predators never forgave. They would come in greater numbers, in stronger fleets. They would hunt with fury, but now, the galaxy was no longer silent prey. Now, when the hunters came, they would find fire waiting. The Resolute drifted among the stars, battered but unbroken behind it. Survivors and allies formed their ragged fleet. Ahead, the hunter's shadow spread across the galaxy. But between shadow and prey now stood humanity. And humanity had made a vow. They would not stop. They would not bend. They would answer every cry for help. And they would show the galaxy that Deathworlders did not run. They fought.